This new world began with the creation of men and spirits and was entirely filled with harmony among beings. The spirits shared their power with humans, and those humans were able to use magic with it. According to one saying, where there is good, there will always be evil. Humans began to abuse magic for their own benefit and decided to start the Great War for the sake of taking away the Duka's power. As a result, the spirits had to hide their true appearance on Earth. Once the spirits disappeared, all magic disappeared. The ground withered and people began to gradually die. And at the moment when everyone was already despairing, someone cried out with tears in his eyes. The man frantically screamed and cried as he could no longer continue to stand idly by and only watch so many good and innocent people die. He couldn't forget how merciful everyone had been to him, so he asked to be granted a miracle so that people could live. The last spirit left to live on human earth listened to his plea and turned his tears into a beautiful river as a final gesture of generosity. Through the power of this miracle, life was reborn on Earth. The people proclaimed that Man-King and the country was named Lacrima, which meant tears. In the distant future, Lacrima became a great empire and gained extremely and powerful. Many years later in the present day, the young girl screamed that she wasn't going anywhere. The maids stood and whispered. They didn't understand why it was so noisy on such a beautiful day. One of the maids said that a letter had come from the imperial palace, and it said that their mistress had been chosen as a candidate for crown princess. The young lady wanted to run away and not let this happen, as she had heard that the crown prince had too complicated a temper, and none of the girls could stand him. So they all escaped, and now the only remaining lady in the empire is the young mistress who must marry him. She knew the crown prince was still that man, and hoped he would choose another lady. In capriciousness of character, the young girl was not inferior to the crown prince. She frantically screamed that she didn't want to walk for him. The girl hoped to avoid such a fate. Lastly, that spirit gave a few more words to the man who had become king. He said that the king's heirs, generation after generation, would work miracles with the help of tears. But if people forget their tears, the country will fall. It's a story about a country made of tears, about a crown prince who long ago forgot how to cry. The young girl was screaming exhaustedly that she didn't want to marry the crown prince. She wished for happiness, but not with him, as she knew from rumors what kind of man he was. The mere thought of marrying without love frightened her. Tears of blessing, the power generated by the first emperor, which is passed down from generation to generation. When a person with this power sheds his tears, it will mean that a miracle has occurred. A young boy sat beside the wounded woman in tears. He had heard from his uncle that the tears of royalty worked wonders, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. The man had told him that it was possible to bring even the dead back to life, but he couldn't believe it himself. The man smirked as he approached the young boy and said that he should think it over carefully, as the woman was accused of killing the emperor. The young boy knew his mom would never do such a thing. He knew that the situation going on was very suspicious. The young man looked tearfully at his uncle. A man said losing his own mother can be a heartbreaking experience. The man was sure that fate was favoring the boy after all, as he could have inherited the throne and become crown prince much sooner. He assured him not to be so broken over little things. The man told the boy to stay close to him. The young man was very angry at the loss of his loved ones. He was angry at his uncle for saying such things. The boy grabbed the broken glass and swung around, for he knew that the day his father died, his uncle was smiling suspiciously as he left the room where his father had been. In the last moments of his life, his mother said that the young man should not cry, as the crown prince's tears were very precious and a multitude of people would desire them. She assured him that he must not be sad, must not sympathize, and must not suffer. He had to be cold to everyone, and he needed to get over his feelings. She assured him that the emperor must be just such a man. If he sheds his tears for someone as well, it would mean that person is too precious to him. The young man listened to his mother's last words and wanted to get closer to her, but the young crown prince's guards pulled him away and took him away from his mother. He listened to her words from afar and stopped crying. He knew he needed to make himself strong and not let others break him. 14 years later, after the death of the emperor and empress, people had forgotten the true meaning of tears and only longed for miracles that brought them strength. But Riton, the current emperor, didn't use the tears of blessing, the power of which every emperor was endowed with. Tears of blessing can also be shed by other members of the imperial family. Even though the crown prince had marvelous powers, he looked down on people, and there was only a mocking arrogance in his eyes. He transformed from a small, fragile boy to a grown, cold man. There were rumors that as a result of the extinction of the fruits of miraculous power, the empire might collapse. So, that care should have been taken to give birth to the next generation, to pass on the power to appease the people. The servants were whispering as they knew the young lady was on her way, the candidate chosen to be crown princess. They knew she was the only survivor with royal blood. As they were whispering, the crown prince approached them. They were frightened and began to beg for forgiveness because they had neglected their authority and unknowingly unleashed their tongue. The young man was angry with them and said they could only be allowed to return when they stopped talking. He would walk away from them, and in the aftermath, they would earnestly beg his forgiveness. He knew he was constantly being insulted and discussed behind his back. Everyone said that he had not shed a single tear during his entire reign, and his nature made the blood run down in the veins of others. People didn't understand how such a person could rule an empire. The gray-haired man looked at the caged bird and marveled at its capabilities, since the bird was free to change its body size. A young man came into his room and told him that the crown prince was on his way to see them. He said that a young man was on his way to greet them. The man hoped that the young lady would not run out of the room in tears after meeting the prince. He wanted everything to go well and without any problems. The girl approached the bird and greeted it. She couldn't believe that they could lock such a tiny baby in a cage. She thought people were very mean. The girl knew it was not in her plans for the prince to come to her. She decided to set her free. The man met the prince and said he admired the bird, as she was truly amazing and could change the size of her body. He assured him that in other countries, such birds were considered sacred. The prince looked at him and said he hoped he would have no further trouble because of the bird. The man assured him that there would be no problem with the prince's bird and said it was in the room. The man started looking for his keys, but unfortunately could not find them. The prince heard the sound of wings. As he entered the room, he saw the young lady next to the giant bird. He was surprised, and for a moment he was confused. The girl nuzzled the bird and said she was in a bit of a hurry and asked the bird to fly away faster. She wanted to quickly leave the imperial palace. The prince was shocked at everything that was happening. He realized that the young lady wanted to get away from him, but he knew he couldn't let her escape. The prince ran to the girl and grabbed her leg. The prince managed to grab the young lady before she almost flew away and plowed her to the floor. He didn't understand how she had managed to sneak inside and go unnoticed, and still touch the things that belonged to the imperial family. The prince leaned closer to her and asked if she realized what she had done. The girl could not answer anything and only stared intently at the prince. Back in her distant childhood, the young girl's mother disappeared and she had no memory of her face at all. Her father raised the girl alone. Even though it was hard, they made it through. The heavy burden of a young girl's life began after her father died. She went to the man and asked for money to bury her father. He looked at her with disdain and said that he had suffered already severe damage because of her father. He told her to be grateful that he wasn't asking her to reimburse him for all the losses. Eventually, she had to leave her homeland in search of a better life. Such an act was very hard for the girl, but she could not do otherwise. She survived as best she could by working as a maid in one of the noblemen's houses. One day the man said she no longer had to do such dirty work, since she will be his adopted daughter and lady of the Archduke's house. The girl thought she was lucky to be adopted. She hoped she could be happy again. People whispered behind her back and said that she looked a lot like the deceased mistress, but they didn't understand why a man would adopt a commoner. They were sure he had no self-esteem at all. Until now, the girl had lived to fulfill the role of Archduchess. But now she was to devote her life entirely to the Crown Prince. She knew she had to do it, but she felt heavy at heart. She understood everything perfectly well, but she didn't expect to be tied up and taken to the Crown Prince like a sack of potatoes. It was hard for her. She was frantic to live the life she wanted to live. She was told she was the last remaining noblewoman in the empire. She knew she wanted to be married off by any means necessary. But the girl could not allow this to happen, and decided that in every possible way she would create reasons why they would not want to take her in marriage. The prince frantically wanted to know from the girl who she was. He was uncomfortable with the situation. He wanted to get it all sorted out soon. He was surprised by the behavior of his young chosen one. While the young prince was looking at the stranger, a huge bird tried to fly away, and she succeeded. With a few flaps of her wings, she flew away through the window. Everyone was looking at the trail of the departing bird. The young lady looked at the prince, and his single glance made her fearful. The prince looked at the girl closely and said she was an unusual petty thief, and saw her for the first time. The young girl decided to take advantage of the situation and frantically screamed for him to arrest her. She looked at him and said that she had dared to touch an item that belonged to the imperial family and thus committed a serious offense. Therefore, it would be difficult for a prince to marry such a girl. The prince looked at her and asked who told her to do such a thing to a bird. The young girl hastily rose from the floor and said that she had done such an act of her own volition. She knew she'd rather go to prison than marry him. The prince approached her and asked her that she had willingly done such a thing to avoid an engagement to him. The young girl started to get nervous. He got quite close to her and said that he was curious about her, since so far, everyone only wanted power, and she apparently didn't want high status. He leaned even closer to her and said that he had an interesting thought in his head, for in his good way, he should have punished the young girl appropriately. But he had another way that would be the best solution for her. The young girl couldn't stand this closeness. She didn't understand why things were happening to her like this. The girl broke free from her prince's grasp and wanted to run away. The young prince shouted for the guards to grab the girl. The young girl looked at the prince with frightened eyes. She didn't understand why things had turned out this way. She was captured by the guards. She didn't understand what was going on or what they were going to do. The girl yelled at them. She wished and demanded to be released. The young prince looked disdainfully at the girl and said that he would visit her later. The prince thought the agony and pain would help her realize what she had done. The young lady looked at the prince with frightened eyes and didn't understand how such a thing could be done. The girl was locked in a dungeon. She screamed exhaustedly and didn't understand how he could lock her in a dungeon and try to intimidate her. She thought he had a terrible temper. She thought she'd be lashed a couple times and kicked out. The young girl remembered the prince's eyes and didn't understand why he would come to her. She thought it would be better if he beat her with a whip and threw her out. She was alone in the dungeon, and it made her shiver. But suddenly she heard a sound, and she was frantically afraid. She thought it was better for her to be in the dungeon alone than to be alone with him. A strange man approached her cell. The girl began to drink exhaustedly. The man looked at her and apologized for scaring her. He didn't mean to scare her. He looked at her and apologized for the way their meeting had happened. He looked at her and asked if he was correct in thinking she was Ravenna. So it was Ravenna he was looking for. A servant came running to the prince. He was terrified and shouted that there was trouble. The prince didn't want to hear him yell and told him not to yell, but to get straight to the point. The servant said Lady Ravenna was missing from the dungeon. The prince was shocked at such news, because I was sure that it simply couldn't happen. The young girl stood and looked at the man with confusion. She didn't understand why he helped her, but after their conversation, she realized he was the second prince. The prince smiled at her and told her she could call him Tatio. Tatio Yana Regnator was the second prince of Lacrima. The young girl was frightened, looked at Prince Takio and asked if she could go out whenever she wanted. The prince looked at her and said that she need not worry about such a thing as His Majesty had forgiven her offense. Young Ravenna didn't understand what the words about him asking for her meant. The prince looked at her and said she could still be crown princess. The girl was shocked at what she heard. There was no way she expected to be able to marry him after this. She didn't want that. The girl wanted to get out of the castle as soon as possible. The young lady didn't understand why the prince had changed his mind. She said that, after all, touching the things of the imperial family are incredibly grave offenses. Prince Takio looked at her and said with a smile that of course she had committed a great sin. But the crown prince was interested in the girl for the first time. The young girl didn't understand what interest could be talked about. Ravenna realized that now she would not be able to avoid an engagement to the prince. After their brief conversation, the prince asked if he had understood her correctly that she did not wish to marry. Ravenna realized that she had been too open, showing her dislike for the crown prince. Tatio looked at her and said what usually annoyed the young ladies, the fact that they couldn't get crown princess status. Tatio looked at Ravenna and said that the rumors about her were true, namely that she was not an ordinary person. Ravenna looked at him and said she wanted to ask him something. The prince was surprised, but he was curious to know what she wanted to ask him. Ravenna looked at the prince and asked why he had brought her here. He looked at her puzzled, but a moment later he looked at her with a smile and said that he would tell her everything, only on one condition, if everything remained between them. Prince Takio said with a smile that it was an imperial order, and she has only one chance to avoid marriage to the crown prince. Ravenna was surprised and bewildered. Prince Takio said that all she needs to do is get the crown prince's tears, and then all her wishes will come true. Ravenna was horrified. She didn't understand why she had to do such a thing. The prince said that if she succeeded in getting his tears, her marriage would be immediately dissolved, and the emperor will promptly thank her generously. Prince Tatito said that the whole conversation must remain secret, and the crown prince must not know anything about it, as he could immediately kick her out or worse. The girl decided to protest, but the prince said she didn't have much choice. All she has to do is marry or else extract tears. Young Ravenna didn't understand how she could mine the tears of such an emotionless and cold-blooded man. She was uncomfortable and very scared. The prince looked at her and said he understood her feelings perfectly. He knew she thought the situation was unfair. He had left her no choice, and she was having a hard time making a decision. He looked at her and asked her what she would do if he helped her. The crown prince ran to their room with lightning speed. He was angry. The young man flew into the room and saw the girl along with Takio. Prince Tashio looked at the crown prince with a chuckle and said he was delayed. The young man hastily approached Ravenna and asked his brother why the young lady was in such a place and not in a dungeon. A frightened Ravenna looked at the crown prince and said that she wasn't a princess, so she wouldn't be in the dungeon anymore. The crown prince was surprised by such a statement. Tachio looked at the young man and said that the girl was telling the truth, as the emperor himself had forgiven the girl for her mistake. Takio, with a smirk on his face, said that the girl could be his bride in the future, so he has every reason to socialize with her. Ravenna looked at the young people and realized that the atmosphere around them was not the most prosperous. She noticed that the young men didn't get along. The crown prince looked at the girl with contempt and said he realized she wanted to be treated politely. The girl said she didn't care. She just wanted to go back. The young man looked at her and said that in that case their conversation would go well. As she left, the crown prince said that from tomorrow she would begin to wish she had stayed in the dungeon. At the last, he looked at her with disdain and said she'd regret everything. The young man's words sent the girl into hysterics. She was frantically angry and thought about the fact that there was no way she would marry him. Even if she was facing death, she still wouldn't marry him. Tadio looked at the girl and asked if she had any desire to accept his offer. The girl screamed exhaustedly and wordlessly begged him for help. He was surprised she answered, even without a second of thought. The prince laughed at her and said she was indeed an interesting person. After seeing this, the prince approached the young lady, kissed her hand, and said he understood why his brother had chosen her as his wife. Prince Takio said with a smirk that he wouldn't just help her out. He said that if the girl fulfilled his conditions, she could acquire many allies in the palace. Prince Takio looked at the young girl and said that it would be good if the girl could bring tears to the prince's eyes and report frequently on the progress of the task. He assured her that they would be. The young person was scared and didn't know if things would really be as he said. The prince assured the girl that such an offer was very much to her advantage. The girl looked at him and timidly asked. Perhaps her assignment was because the relationship between the crown. Prince Takio looked at the frightened girl and said he wouldn't deny it, as the relationship between the men was strained to the will, but he thought they shouldn't talk about such a thing. Tatio said with a smile on his face that if she was very interested, she needed to listen to him very carefully, as there would often. Young Ice reviewed the information. She was determined and wanted to get on with the task immediately. Takio looked at the young beauty and said that in such a situation, the saying once to see, then 7 times to hear is very appropriate. He said it was best for her to find out about the crown prince herself. Ravenna told Tatio that she brought the records she could find, but there weren't really that many records. She had expected there to be more. Ravenna sat and read the information about the crown prince. It was written in the scrolls that no matter how much suffering was in front of the prince, and in the books read to the prince, the ending was always tragic, but unfortunately it had no effect, and it was all in vain. Prince was not allowed to blink at all for 5 minutes. The girl thought that it looked like His Majesty had tried a great many ways, and this one must have looked a little funny. But what surprised the girl further was that they decided to try to give very spicy food that normal people could not eat. And even reading all the information, the young girl was horrified by the fact that the prince is an impenetrable man. Ravenna the girl thought that by reading the book she would find fresh notes about the prince. But when she looked close, the young girl and shouted to the young men as she wanted to ask them something she was concerned about, but heard that they were discussing a candidate for the crown princess. The young men said that the commoner and was born half monster, half human. They believed that it was because of this that she was able to attract the crown. Ravenna approached the young men who were furiously discussing her. One of the girls asked with a smile if Ravenna needed help. Ravenna waved it off and said she was fine. Ravenna looked at them with disdain and said that she had heard their entire conversation and didn't know she had any power, per se. The young men were frightened and hastily began to make excuses. They said they had no intention of offending her at all, but many people had misconceptions about her, and she was constantly surrounded by other people's views. But despite this, the girl always bravely fought back. The girl was walking down the hallway. She knew that if she had the power, no one would dare to belittle her further. But because she didn't have that power, sometimes, lowering her eyes and muttering to herself, she didn't notice how she accidentally bumped into the young man. Her book fell. He looked at her and said, her facial expression looking a fraction as rude. The prince realized where she went in broad daylight and asked her if the prince stepped on the book. The girl was shocked by this behavior of the young man. The young prince took his eyes aside and did not look at the girl. He said she seems to like to act like a rat. She knew that no matter what activity he caught her doing, the prince stepped closer to her and said with a smirk that since she liked to walk alone, since she looked like she was ignored by other people. The girl hesitated a bit, but said it wasn't like that at all. The prince was about to leave the young lady, and said lastly that he did not think she was so bold. The girl was shocked that he had decided to detain her only to say such words. The young girl knew she couldn't just let him go like that. She knew this was her chance. Ravenna tugged at his sleeve, apologizing at the same time, and she looked at him and said there was one play she would like to see. Ravenna frantically wished he would agree, and they walked together. He looked at her and said through gritted teeth that she didn't seem to realize what a difficult situation. He didn't understand why he had to go with her, or why she had chosen him. The girl said with a smile, the prince was in a hurry. He wanted to get out of her company quickly. The girl yelled out that they could go to the play the day after tomorrow. She shouted that Ravenna knew that that torn-out piece of paper definitely spelled out the crown prince's weakness. The girl knew that if she kept this up, she was sure to endear herself to. It was very bright, and the prince didn't want to wake up. He frantically wanted to rest some more and not see anyone. The prince wrapped himself under the blanket and lay down further. A young girl burst into the prince's room. The maid was telling her to calm down and wait for the prince to wake up and come to her. But the girl was serious, and she wanted to wake. The young prince was shocked at the girl's behavior. He hadn't expected her to come to him on her own. He didn't want to see anyone. She looked at him and said she wouldn't leave him until he got up and asked him if he had bought a ticket. The prince was uncomfortable. The prince reluctantly rose from the bed and asked her if she was ashamed to show herself in such an outfit in front of a man. The girl was surprised. She looked at him and said with a smirk that he must have thought something obscene. Riven asked him how he wasn't ashamed to think. Ravenna said with a smile that she thought the prince would be able to laugh heartily from the comical moments or cry to tears from the sad production values. The prince and Ravenna packed up and rode in a carriage to the play. She told the prince that he would definitely enjoy the play as it features the best prima donna in beautiful voice, exciting acting, mesmerizing, attractive appearance of the diva could strike at first sight. The girl assured that if once you look at the acting, Ravenna said with admiration that even aristocrats say that it is difficult to snatch even one extra ticket to a performance with the diva. The principal looked at her and said that he could see from her reaction that she didn't want to show him the play, but more so wanted to get in there herself, and the prince looked at the young lady and said that she could have gone to the play herself after all. He didn't understand why she was taking. The prince looked at her and quickly averted his eyes. He didn't understand why she would ask such a thing, because he knew such a question didn't apply. Riven didn't understand why he didn't want to talk about it. She said they would likely be together for a long time, so she thought it would be right to get to know. She genuinely wanted to know what the prince liked so that she could get closer to him and begin to understand him better. The prince looked at the young lady with bewilderment. He didn't want to get close to her at all. The prince knew what the consequences could be if he got close to anyone. They were met by a gentleman, and with all politeness asked them to follow him, when suddenly and unexpectedly they heard. The young girl looked tearfully at the paper gentleman and asked if they were here to meet the diva. The man looked at the girl and said that she was being very rude, as a low-born child dare not speak to them like that. Ravenna approached the young girl and asked her what she wanted. Ravenna wanted to help the young lady, as she had been in her shoes once herself. The young lady timidly said that she wanted to ask Ravenna something if she would let her, since she really admires the diva, and thought it would be great if she could watch the performance like them. On how she performs, the man looked at the little girl puzzled and said he understood what she wanted to see. However, he didn't think that such high-ranking guests would be tempted to accept such a foolish request. Ravenna looked at the little girl and asked if she was sure she should just hand the flowers to the diva. The girl was very glad that the young mistress had agreed to fulfill. The young girl looked at the mistress and said that if she would indeed help fulfill another request, The mistress would be very pleased and asked her to tell the diva. The man, smiling, told Ravenna that she had a very big heart since she had decided to accept such a child's request. Ravenna looked at him and said that he got it right, and this child is a foreigner, as is the diva herself. Ravenna said that changing her opinion of foreigners is one of the things Cassia has managed to accomplish. She said, Ravenna said with a smile, the girl seemed to have a strong interest in the prince. The girl apologized to the prince and said she would have to leave him for a while so she could give the Ravenna said she was envious even of herself that she could accompany him to such a play. She felt that such an event simply could not fail to please. The prince said the man approached his accomplice and told him to repeat their plan one more time. He wanted to get on with While the men were whispering aside and plotting something untoward, Ravenna and the prince were having a casual conversation. Ravenna and the prince arrived at their seats. The girl was overjoyed and marveled at the beauty of the hall. She had never seen so many people. He looked at her and didn't understand how she could contemplate like that. It puzzled him that It didn't take long for Ravenna to decide that she could solve the problem of his whereabouts very simply. She walked over and tied a ribbon around the prince's arm in the chair. Ravenna tied the arm and tied the ribbon into a bow. She looked at the prince and said that now she could rest assured that he wouldn't run away anywhere. Ravenna took the bouquet and headed for the door. She said she was just leaving, and he could untie the knot before she came. The prince looked. Ravenna knocked on the door to the prima donna and waited for her answer. She was very nervous, as this was the first time she was supposed to meet her in person. Ravenna waited a very long time for the diva to come out. She thought she was probably out of place and hoped she'd be back soon, but knew the whole situation was a bit odd, as the show was about to start. Ravenna wondered what had happened and where Cassia was. She thought maybe she'd already gone to the stage. Ravenna knew she couldn't just stand still. The young lady decided not to waste any time and decided to look around. She thought that if they didn't meet now, it wouldn't be a big deal. The Kapellendiener was essentially the administrator of the theater, and his duties included, among other things, escorting them to their seats. He walked down the hallway and continuously looked around. Ravenna went to get the theater administrator, as she wanted to clarify where the diva was. But the girl didn't expect to see something like this. She saw the kid. Without a moment's thought, Ravenna decided to run away immediately. The theater director frantically shouted and gave orders for the young fugitive to be caught. Ravenna ran there, frantically screaming and begging for help. She was looking for someone to help her. When she was offending, she confronted a man. She screamed for him to help her since Cassia had been kidnapped. The man decided to waste no— The prince sat in the hall and waited for his companion. He knew the girl was already late. He sat back and wondered what he would— The curtain opened, and everyone started whispering as they didn't understand what was going on. The people in the audience knew that this is not how a show should start. The prince sat back and realized the young ladies came to the man and said that they had searched the entire dressing room, but did not find the diva. As if her trace was gone, while the man was screaming, Prince came up behind him and asked him if he was sure he realized the actress was missing. The prince looked at the gathered people and said that their conversation was broken by a man who ran up to them. He panted and said he found a bouquet of flowers in the hallway by the back door. The men were shocked. The man looked at the young man who had come running in with the flowers and asked him what he was doing at the back door. The prince wondered about everything. He knew that the prince looked at the men and said that he wasn't going to get involved at all, but if you have the aristocracy involved, the people who attended the play initially were very angry. As the organizers did not raise the curtain for a long time and later closed the doors, people were screaming and wanted to know who was the main organizer, as they wanted to deal with him quickly. They wanted to know what the reason was and why they were being delayed so long. The organizer was sitting beside— The organizer looked at the prince with frightened eyes and said that he was the most important in this situation. The prince, with a nonchalant look that expressed no emotion, the prince sat pondering and didn't understand how such a situation could have even happened. He checked the register, however. A representative man approached the prince and the organizer and said that aristocrats with busy schedules spared no precious time in order to come to the theater. He grinned and told the prince that it was rude of him to do that to them. The man was exhausted from drinking and wished the girl would come out immediately and explain the whole situation. He yelled that he wouldn't make a move. The prince was surprised after hearing they were expanding the theater. The man looked at him and said they had recently bought the building next door and were now ready to expand. After hearing this, the prince asked the young man if it was possible to enter that building without leaving where they were. The young man looked fearfully at the prince and said there was a passage that led. The organizer looked at the prince and said that without his further settlements, the situation might get out of hand, for it was at this point that all the visitors were waiting for an explanation. The organizer was shocked by everything that was going on. The prince looked at him and said that he would now point out the young men, and they should immediately follow him into the building next door. Prince speculated that the man who was introduced as a sponsor by the missing actress could boldly try to kidnap her. He knew the man was furious. He didn't understand what was so hard about stealing just one woman without witnesses. His accomplice excused himself as best he could, for he did not know that if he... The man in the cap looked at his accomplice and said they couldn't get the money unless they handed over the woman. The man ordered his associates to take care of the original plan, and he would take... The man looked disdainfully at the young lady who was trying to get up. He asked her if she really thought her intervention would make a difference. She yelled exhaustedly, as she did not want him to get close to her and hurt her. The man looked at her and said he thought it would be better if they didn't. The man presented a knife to the young lady's throat. Ravenna was startled and recoiled. He looked at her and said it was good to have a gun with you after. Riven wasn't going to listen to his chatter. She was interested in what they were going to do with Cassia. The man was surprised, as she was in such a difficult situation. The man said they were ordered to kidnap her by the Count as he was out for revenge. The man said that all because he kept proposing marriage to her, but he was constantly rejected. And finally, he decided to kidnap her from the stage so that the theater... The man said that if everything goes as the Count planned, then the career of the actress will end there, even if... Ravenna didn't understand how they could even do such a thing. She thought they were worse than beasts after that. The man said he thought he would be worse. The man said he would try his best to make it less painful for her, but only if she didn't resist. The girl didn't know what to do, but unfortunately, she had no choice. Ravenna turned to him and told him that she wasn't going to comply with anything criminals like him would say. Ravenna rushed towards the door. She knew, but unfortunately, her escape was not successful. The man caught on quickly. He couldn't let her escape, so the man was holding the young lady by the hair when suddenly he heard a noise. The young lady was perplexed. Ravenna began to scream. She wanted attention, but the man quickly regained his senses as he realized her intentions. He covered her mouth with his hand and pulled her to the side. The prince heard the girl scream and whirled into the room. But when he went into the room, he saw that it was empty. But he was tormented by doubt. He felt that something very suspicious was going on in the room. Cassia screamed furiously as she knew she had done nothing wrong, and everything was unfair to her. She screamed at people, pointed at her kidnapper, and yelled that they were the ones who kidnapped her. The men stood nervously watching the altercation from the sidelines. They whispered and didn't know who to trust. One of the men argued. Cassia was furious and told them to explain to her why she had to lie, and said that she wasn't dragged to a building like that at all alone. Cassia wanted to know what they had. The theater employee became dramatically nervous. The employee said they don't know at all and what she's saying. The prince saw a ribbon on the ground. He walked over to it, crouched down, and picked it up, and the man sat with Ravenna in the closet with his arms wrapped around her and held her hostage. She wanted to break free quickly, but Ravenna could clearly feel how much her body trembled with fear. She didn't want to die. She was very scared. Frantically, the kidnappers looked amongst themselves and said they didn't know what Cassia was talking about at all. Since this was the first time they had heard of the girl, the prince sat pensive and contemplated the whole situation. He was asked what they should do, as the girl was not there, and even in the other rooms, she was not. The prince, after a little thought, said that in that case there was nothing they could do, and they needed to return to the main building. The kidnapper in the closet was overjoyed when he heard Riven didn't understand what was going on or how he would proceed. She hadn't ruled out the possibility that he'd just decided to rub his tongue. The girl accepted her fate and thought that if she died, she would come to him in dreams and torture him to death. Prince hit the kidnapper and he fell. He looked at the girl and said he knew she was in the closet. The girl didn't understand how he could know that. The prince looked at her and said it was pretty obvious, because if you want to hide, the best hiding place is a closet. He looked at her and asked if it was true that she thought Ravenna swung a swinging punch at the prince. Everyone in the room began to look around and whisper. They didn't understand why she had hit her. He looked at her perplexed and asked if she was crying. The girl was furious and said it wasn't that important right now. She asked him to He hugged her tighter and told her not to cry in front of him again. Ravenna grinned. She didn't understand how he dared. The prince looked at the men who were looking at him and his companion in bewilderment and told them not to stand idly by, but to seize that man and the closet and tie him up. After the truth was revealed, everyone was captured and the perpetrators were tied up. Putting all the testimony together, Ravenna walked over to Cassia and apologized to her, as she hadn't meant for things to go down like this at all. She handed her the flowers and told her that a girl really wanted to give them to her. Cassia was touched to the core, as the young girl wasn't just looking for her, she just wanted to convey something so touching. A man ran into the ladies' chambers. He was excited and frightened. He said he had heard everything that had happened to her and asked if she was okay. The man looked at her and saw a cut on her neck. He was shocked. But the young lady only said that she was really fine, and the wound didn't hurt as much as it used to. The young girl was visited by her father. He was shocked by everything. The young mistress tried to. The man took his daughter in his arms and carried her to the prince. He was furious at what had happened. A man burst into the prince's office and shouted that he had an urgent conversation to have with him. The prince was a little puzzled and shocked from the fact that when the Archduke learned of the injury, he immediately arrived at the imperial palace. The servant said that because the lady didn't want to, the prince was shocked, but the young mistress said that they could discuss everything themselves, and there was no need to involve the prince in the whole story. Darum Dux Duarte, an archduke with a mighty army and a vast territory. The Archduke was shocked that the girl herself did not want to tell everything in detail. He thought the cut was no trifle, for after all he had heard, the Archduke looked at his daughter and asked the prince if his daughter would be safe if such a thing happened again. The prince turned away and said nothing. The young lady was furiously angry because of the prince's behavior. The Archduke said he understood everything, and he probably made a mistake when he made the decision to send his daughter to the palace. The girl was in shock and didn't understand. Looking at his daughter, he said he no longer wanted her to be with the prince. He looked at her, and she looked at her father and said that he had originally sent her to the imperial palace against her will, and now she looked at her father and apologized to him for putting herself in danger and told him she would be more careful. The Archduke looked at the young lady and said that she had never changed and was still unwilling to accept his help. He looked at her and wondered if she could really manage on her own. The Archduke looked at her and said that she alone would have a hard time dealing with many things and people in the world. The Archduke said he understood her, and in that case he would leave her in the prince's care and he apologized for showing rudeness to the prince. The man said that in that case he needed to be on his way already, and he left them. The prince and the servant stared dumbfoundedly. The prince looked at the young lady and said that her father was right. Since there was truth in his words, he didn't understand why she couldn't live the rest of her life in luxury and security. The prince came close to the young lady and said he would give her some advice. He said that she should listen to herself more often because she could develop her intuition better, but she shouldn't force herself to stay in the imperial palace. Ravenna looked at him and asked why he even thought she was attracted to him. The young lady said that even if she had fallen in love with him, she looked at him and said angrily that even if she wanted to leave, she wanted to make that decision herself, not follow someone else's opinion. The prince looked at her and said with a smirk. The prince looked at the young lady and said that since their family squabbles were already over, she could leave his office. The prince knew that ever since this woman had been around, very strange things had not stopped happening to him. Ravenna didn't understand why everyone was telling her what to do. She doesn't even have time to put it in again. She was standing in the garden and thinking about everything when suddenly she heard an incomprehensible sound. A moment later, the girl saw a bird. Prince Tatio approached her and said that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. He asked what she was doing in the garden, since he kept looking for her. The girl was surprised that he was looking for her and asked him if he was looking for her because of his anxiety. He said he had heard that. He looked at her and said that it was only natural to be worried in such a situation. The girl timidly replied that of course she was. She looked at the prince and asked where he got the bird. The prince said he found the unconscious bird lying near the imperial palace, so he couldn't just pick it up and leave it there. For a while he took care of the bird, and later he let it go. The young one looked at the prince puzzled. She was shocked at what she heard. The girl said that in that case it was just adorable, as the bird must have wrecked. The prince looked at the young lady and said that he had actually just come to see if she was okay, but he also had something he wanted to give her. The prince carefully approached the young girl and apologized for being rude. He put the necklace on her. Rivna was shocked, not understanding why he did it. Prince said he just wanted to give her a gift in honor of them getting along. The young girl was in shock and didn't know what to do in such a situation, as she didn't know at all who had treated her like this before. The prince looked at the young lady and said with a smile that such a gem could not be found anywhere else. While it's not a particularly large, Tatio looked at her and said that he also hoped he could help her in the future and would definitely keep him safe. He said she would certainly. The Archduke came to the emperor and saluted him. The emperor said that he had been waiting a long time for the emperor approached the Archduke and said that he would change him very much, and he knew very well that he loved and worried about his daughter very much. He came close to the Archduke and said he didn't understand how he could be so attached to her and love her. The emperor asked the man why he had come to have an audience with him after all. The Archduke said he would like to bring his daughter home. The emperor looked at him and said with a smirk, which of course was intended originally, that it would be good to end. Kneeling before the emperor, the Archduke said he would follow his will. The man knew that if he had known earlier about everything that could happen. The emperor thanked him with a smirk and said that thanks to his daughter, the prince was going out more often and no longer looked like the living. The Archduke was puzzled and asked the emperor what he meant. The emperor said that he likes his daughter and would love to see him. The Archduke brought the young lady to his daughter and said that from now on she would be her personal attendant. Of course, she is still young, but Ravenna was very happy that the girl was a knight, and she said that the young lady could call her Ravenna and asked her to take care of her. Riven was temporarily under house arrest. Her father said he doesn't understand at all why a sensible person like her keeps getting into incomprehensible situations. Ravenna looked at the girl. She was embarrassed since but I especially was a very quiet child. She didn't realize if she would be okay since she was even younger than her. The young lady heard an incomprehensible sound outside the window. In a flash, she ran to the window. Rivera was shocked and asked her to wait. A bird flew into their room. Riviera said it was her friend, and she had been fostering the bird for some time now. Rivera said she's sitting in confinement, but would like to see the crown prince's face. But unfortunately, he's hiding from the young lady. The young girl's name was heard after the 11th episode. Kanu Reba was Rank's personal maid. The girl stood. Riviera told his new friend that if he didn't meet her, she would follow the girl. The maid approached the prince and asked if he was going to sit in the tree all day. The maid said that there was one person from the Lady Riviera who would come to the prince to meet him. The girl looked at the prince and said that she didn't know if his words would make her sound impertinent, but she had to say it. The principal looked at her and said that if she knew that the words would sound impertinent, then she shouldn't have said anything at all, as he wasn't at all interested in what was on her mind. The girl realized her mistake and apologized to the prince for her oversight. Prince was shocked at the girl for not even noticing she was being watched. Ravenna stood under the tree the prince was sitting in and smirked at the fact that his man was supporting her. The prince looked at his chosen one and said he didn't think she would follow the maid. The prince didn't think she was such a pesky girl after all. The girl was visited by her bird. The girl apologized and said she had no way out and would use the second method. The prince looked at her and said that she was. With the help of a bird, the young lady climbed up the tree. The prince was shocked, for the girl was behaving very noisily. The young lady looked at him with a smile and said she had a cute bird and her name was Ruby. The prince was shocked and bewildered. The girl looked at the prince and said it was the same bird she had released when she first met him. With a smile, she said that he got close to her and told her he wasn't stuck with her because he liked it. He assured her that this way it would be difficult. The young girl was confused and said that she did not want to marry him in any way. Riven didn't understand how he could joke about such a situation. She sat beside him and realized that the atmosphere between them was pleasant to the will. Ravenna said that last time she read some sort of record of him, and she saw all the orders and all the experiments. She looked at the young man and said that the precious tears of blessing would help save many lives. She wondered why he didn't use them. Usually, everyone who asked for such information was divided into two types. They either wanted to use the young man or the young man didn't know if she would be able to understand him if he told her everything, the real essence of the emperor. The emperor most likely killed them. After the murder, the man blamed the young prince's mother and saved him to use his power. After the reminiscence, the prince was taken aback. The girl was shocked, and she asked if he was okay. The prince asked. Ravenna reached out and hugged the prince. He was shocked as he didn't expect such a thing. He wanted to push her away and yelled at her to leave. Ravenna told him to hold still as they might fall. Ravenna hugged him and said he started it first, since when she was scared, he hugged her. He realized that when this young woman he touched her. The girl was in shock, didn't realize what was going on, and asked what he was doing. After what had happened, they sat there with a sense of awkwardness between them. She realized she had helped him. The prince jumped down from the tree and said that the emperor wanted his powers, but he had no idea what for. He could use them. He looked at his companion and said one last thing. That was all he could say to her right now.